Welcome to the Megillah Project.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
There's something very interesting that the rabbis of the Talmud already pick up on the name Esther, which is that in Hebrew, it kind of means hidden. It's part of the overarching story of Purim, that so much of it's a hidden story. It's why there is the story of an hapochi. Everything got turned over. There is the custom of dressing up, of hiding ourselves. In Hasidic teachings, they talk a lot about how the miracle, so to speak, of this holiday was all about that it was hidden within nature. It was hidden in plain sight. It's a story of hiding and revealing. In many ways, to me personally, as a very proud, out and proud queer Jew, as a very proud transgender Jew who happens to be a rabbi and who does work within our Jewish community, I think a lot about this story in the context of coming out. In the context of being hidden, I see the story of the Megillah, the first few chapters, as we see the trouble getting stronger and stronger from the sexism that starts out in chapter 1, where, the men have to be in charge, to we get to chapter 2, when Esther, this shy, hidden girl, is taken to the king's home and forced to use all kinds of perfumes and oils for a whole year, to live with a whole group of maidens, for the lack of a better term, and who are being taken to the king for one night. And then as we get to chapter 3 and 4, we see the story getting worse and worse. For Passover, a lot of us think of Passover as the Exodus, as leaving that narrow space, coming out from a narrow space and coming into freedom. One of the teachings of Passover is B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzma. In every generation, we are obligated to see ourselves as we are coming out of Egypt. We are leaving that narrow place. Both having grown up in a Hasidic community where I was told that, yes, this story happened exactly as it is 3,000 years ago. And specifically now, when I don't think the story was ever meant to be taken on face value. There was always a strong emphasis on Passover and also on all holidays, that it isn't about something that happened in the past. It's about how we use that story and what that story tells us in our life. When I look on the Megillah, when I look on Purim, I see the same story working out in our own way, in our own place where we are, specifically within the LGBTQ community in Judaism, but beyond that. I see it when it comes to racism. I see it when it comes to xenophobia. I see it in the way we react and we relate to bad things happening around us. So I want to look for a second on chapter 3 and 4 of the Purim story, of the story of Esther, and reframe that in this context. So we have Esther here. We have this shy girl, this hidden girl, who is also supposed to be beautiful. And I'm not going to go into there's so much online. Just look up queer Esther. You will see so much on that online. And to me, it just seems obvious that in one way or another, she was quite queer. At least her story is very queer. But she finds herself right now in a position of power, in a position where the threats of let's call that the outside world, or in this case, the threats of Haman, the threats of anti-Semitism will not affect her directly. Even when Haman signs a decree to kill all the Jews, I don't think anyone was expecting that will include the queen. Frankly, it seems, according to the rabbis, that a lot of people didn't even know that she was Jewish. Yet the story goes after the bad decree is written, and we have that in chapter 3. For me, I've been thinking a lot about that over the past 4 years. There was constantly more and more quite obvious and direct, hateful decrees coming out. Yet, when Mordechai, who we all know as someone who had a very personal relationship, according to some rabbis, it was a familial relationship. According to some commentaries, it was a romantic relationship. Whatever that was, he had a relationship with Esther. And when he turns to Esther and tells her, listen, we need to speak up. There are negative decrees coming out. There's homophobia, there's transphobia, there's people putting our lives up as if it's a political tool. And we see that specifically in chapter 4, when there's a back and forward here with an intermediator between Esther and Mordechai. And Mordechai tells her, you need to speak up. You need to show up. You need to come to the queen. Her reaction first is, oh, but I can't, basically what she's saying, but it's against the law, which is something that we keep running into. Far too many people still have trouble realizing that the law does not equal right and wrong. Specifically when it comes to racism, but I think we saw it a lot, specifically with queer people of color, which is what I think a lot. We saw it with immigration and we saw it with other things. And to me, one of the most powerful lines in the Megillah is when Mordechai tells the intermediary, the person that was going between him and Esther, and he says one line that is so strong. Kim hachreish tachrishi bo'eis azos revach v'yatzala yamut laYehudim mimakol machal v'yatu beisavich tol v'yedu umi yodeya Im la'eis kazos, he got lamalachut. After Esther is trying to explain how I can't speak up in this situation. I can't speak up against the hate. I can't speak up against, in her case specifically, what seems a lot of homophobia and like telling people how they can or can't live and how sexuality has to be addressed. I can't speak up because maybe it's going to harm me. Maybe the king wouldn't listen. I'm not allowed to show up. And that's why Mordechai tells her, listen, if you are going to be quiet, don't you think for a second that the privilege you have right now is going to keep you in the future. And he makes two interesting points. First, he says, you and your family might be lost, as in your privilege might not stand. But at the same time, who knows? Maybe the only reason you have this privilege, you only got to be the queen, so when it comes and something like this happens, you should be able to speak up. Whatever we see, racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, I can go on and list these lists where there's constantly it keeps switching around. Sometimes we find ourselves on the sides of those being oppressed, and sometimes we find ourselves with a privilege. I'm not even talking here about oppressors, just with a privilege. If there's one main storyline in the story of Esther, in the story about hiding, which is literally what Esther means, is that you cannot stay silent in the face of hate, not just when it impacts you. And it's not just that it's not okay to stay silent when it doesn't impact you, but exactly that's when you are obligated to speak up. When something doesn't impact you is not an excuse for you to speak up less, it's a reason for you to speak up more. Because if not, what's the point? What are you doing with your privilege if not to use it to speak up and to fight back for others? If it's just for yourself, then you're just being selfish. And yes, we all need to speak up. As a trans woman, I know I need to speak up in the face of transphobia. I need to speak up in the face of anti-Semitism. But even more, I know that I need to speak up in the face of xenophobia when there's discrimination against refugees and immigrants. And I need to speak up when there's Islamophobia and so on, because sometimes I need to use the privilege, whatever it is, the privilege of my status, the privilege of my skin color, or whatever it is, to speak up. So much of the Purim story and of the celebration of Purim ends up being celebrating that v'nahapachut, celebrating that fact that the whole story got turned over. Everything that was hidden came out. It's a celebration of coming out, both coming out and being ourselves, but just as importantly, coming out and showing up. To do what Esther, to do what that shy girl stood up, walked into in protest against every law in front of the king and said, this is not okay. My people cannot be killed. And by my people, yes, she was talking about her own people, but not something that was threatening her. So let's take this as this time. We unfortunately can't go out and dress up and have major Purim spiels surrounded by hundreds of people. But what we can do is keep speaking up, to look on the message of this story, of this book, and of this holiday, to not just make jokes and to not just dress up. To do all of that, to dress up and to make jokes, but in support of all those who are being oppressed. To come out from every closet for ourselves and for everyone around us.